Means we can start. Bob and Margie are here. Well, I can't see you though. See, I'm blinded by the light. So. Oh, good. Good. Well, good evening. Glad you're here. We have our resident physicist coming in to sit in the honored front row. Okay, so glad you're here. Again, my name is Dave Newton, if you haven't been here before, and glad you're here for this summer series on apologetics, doing 12 weeks. We're already in our third week, and so let's just jump right in. And again, my basis for doing apologetics, I get my inspiration from Saul of Tarsus being up on the Areopagus there in Athens, just below the Acropolis. You can still go there today, and to think that they went up there and sat and debated and talked with the Stoics, the Epicureans, and so forth, and the full context and the full description of his message is right there on a stone placard as you go up the steps to the Areopagus. And Areopagus means Ares is Mars, Pagus means rock outcropping or hill, so Mars Hill. And I've been up there many times and love to just open up my Blue Letter Bible on my phone and just read aloud that whole sermon of how he defends about the unknown God. So we're using that as our basis. And again, apologetics, if you haven't been here before or you want a little refresher, remember it comes from 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, that we are commanded that at all times we should always be ready to give an apologia in the Greek. It means a legal defense, a reasoned argument regarding the word or the hope that is within us. And our caveats, I'll always cover these. Always remember that as we go through this material week by week, literally everything, I guarantee you, everything I present faces significant challenges, concerns, questions, ridicule, and the classic, come on, Dave, really? Okay? From outside, and sad to say, and within Christian circles. Many Christian theologians, Christian scientists, and so forth would listen to my presentation and at the end just stand up here and say, I want you to forget everything he said because it was all wrong. And they would give you their position on that. So just be prepared. And that's why I say in my second caveat, always remember, great apologetics doesn't mean that in 1 hour over coffee you're going to convince somebody. Because there isn't one nice quick, everybody always wants to know, what's that quick 15-minute answer for the skeptic? And I go, hey, as soon as you find that out, tell me. I'd love to know what that quick 15-minute one is myself. But what you want to do is be reasonable, logical, rational, thoughtful, versus how we're sometimes stereotyped, which is that we're a bunch of unreasonable, illogical, irrational, closed-minded people. And so the goal here is to give you some takeaways each week that are good talking points. I hope you understand that just these 2 weeks on the universe, the galaxy, and now this week drilling down on Earth and life, I have 2 hours, an hour last week and an hour this week. I'm leaving way more stuff out than what I'm covering. So what I've decided to bring in are things I think you can grasp and you'll say, hey, that's a good talking point, or that's a good one to go with. Remember, our worldview is the main lens through which we see things. And it's either that you're in a naturalist mode, everything is accidental, without purpose, no design, no intention, life is simply meaningless outcome of random chance, or the supernaturalist approach, which is that everything exhibits design, intention, creativity. Life must then have some type of meaning and purpose. And ultimately, our naturalist and now our supernaturalist worldview is ultimately going to move toward a Christian biblical worldview, because we're not going to do 12 weeks on creation versus evolution. In fact, next week we're going to get into, so what about the Bible? Is it reliable? Is it full of errors and stuff? So we have lots of topics in the apologetics to cover. So, summary from last week was the macro view, the universe, the galaxies, the solar system, the earth and moon. They seem to exhibit remarkable design. They appear to be fine-tuned in support of life on this one planet. Earth appears to be uniquely, precisely positioned to support a wide variety of biological life, unlike any of the other 7 planets. And natural law is not the cause that brought about the universe. Many scientists like to fall back and say natural law has been eternal, guiding all of the evolutionary processes. And that's just such a backward line of reasoning. Rather, natural law is an outcome It's the fingerprint of the designer creator. And it's a result that we get to see the design and intention with such precision. So what's the logical segue from sessions 1 and 2 to tonight, session 3? Well, we looked at dandelions, cells, humans. We also looked at MacBooks and robots. And we said in every case, they couldn't possibly come about by random chance. I had a little conversation about 15 minutes ago with people who got here early, and a gentleman I was speaking with was saying, so the guy who looks at the space shuttle parked on the loading dock, it's got 2 million parts and 1,600 engineers worked on it and built it, and it's got software programming everything and a design team back in the mission control center, everything like that. No one could logically say, oh yeah, this just evolved. And yet we as human beings are more complex than the space shuttle. And yet they're willing to say, yeah, but that you came about through random chance. So again, they appear to exhibit design, precision, fine-tuning in their form and their function. So the next logical question then is, what about the origins of biological life? It's one thing to look up at the stars, see the galaxies, the universe, the planets, the moon, our planet, but what about life? So again, as I said before, I believe we're going to see more evidence of a creator-designer, but the naturalists will still come back time and time again with what? Given enough time, anything can happen. Okay, well, last week we did the macro view. This week we're going to move into a more micro view. Let's get down into life on planet Earth. Life on Earth. All physical observable evidence points to a perfectly precision, positioned, designed, finely tuned, unique, and very amazing environment to support a wide variety of life. Don't you love those shots of Earth? I mean, you look at a shot of Mars or Venus or Saturn, they're beautiful too, but then you suddenly realize, you just think, there's nothing down there. There's no air, there's no water, there's no life, there's nothing. And yet you look at Earth and you just think to yourself, wow, what's going on down there? Well, the first thing we have is lots and lots of water. I have 7 slides on water, but that would eat up too much of my time tonight. But if you can read up on the fact that virtually every astrophysicist, biologist, chemist all agrees the likelihood of finding water anywhere else in the universe is really minimal. Now you'll hear in the papers and the journals and the documentaries, we're this close to finding water. We think we found some ice on Io. We think we know what's going on at the polar caps on Mars. But they come back time and time again and say, you know what though, it's probably frozen carbon dioxide. And that means that if it ever did get warm enough to melt, what would it do? It wouldn't run into liquid form, it would just evaporate. And so it's toxic too. Nothing can live in that. And if you look at the breakdown of the numbers here, the saline water is 97% of the water on the planet is saline. Only 3% is fresh water. You can see the breakdown with the ice caps, the groundwater, and other. And you just look around the planet and you suddenly realize, yeah, there's a lot of water out there. And yet it's a huge, finely tuned system of constant recycling of water. And it goes up into the clouds. You did this in 5th and 6th grade, didn't you? The water cycles and the water tables and stuff. We all learned that, right? Plants and fresh water abound all over this planet. You go to any other planet, it's just stark. It's got sulfuric acid in the atmosphere. It's got carbon dioxide. It's got methane. It's got there's no life. And then you look at the amazing abundance of water and foliage and plant life. Do you know, there's a couple different places to go, but there's 3 or 4 really good sites that have botanists and so forth who have been chronicling all the plant life on the planet and so forth. There are 73,000 different species of trees. 73,000. I mean, 730 would be a lot. Can you imagine just looking at a list of 730 there? And then you go times 10, that would be 7,300 different types of trees. There's 730,000 different types of trees. There are over 2,000 different species of fruits. 2,000. I love to go to the farmer's market in Carpinteria on Thursdays and just, oh man, on that one day there's probably about 45 of those 2,000 are for sale. But boy, that's fun. Do you know there's over 380,000 vegetables? That's a salad bar, right? 380,000 different types of vegetables. Isn't it amazing that there's 2,000 fruits, 380,000 veggies? That's amazing. Flowers, over 360,000 separate species of flowers. Kim and I traveled to Singapore on a trip one time. We went to the Singapore Gardens just outside of downtown, and they had an orchid exhibit going on. And they said when you walk through, which again, they're right on the equator, the temperature is always 78 degrees, it's always 80% humidity, it rains every afternoon, nothing varies there. It's beautiful, I love it there, so lush. And they said when you walk through the place today, you're going to see 97 different varieties of orchids. And I remember thinking, 97? I didn't know that. I thought there were like 10 or maybe 15 or something. And then they said, and these 97 are only 10% of all the types of orchids that are out there. And I remember the docent said, the park ranger said, and we haven't even chronicled all of the different flowers that are out there. So think about that. And then I like this one. This is the number of described species that are alive on the planet. 2,160,000. Think about that. 2,160,000 species of life. Half of those are insects, and half of those are in my yard. Okay, so over 1 million different kinds of insects, 36,000 different type of fish, 36,000, 11,000 reptiles, 11,000 birds, over 6,500 mammals. I mean, it's just so awe-inspiring to take a look at these numbers, the breakdown. Now, the two worldviews. On the supernaturalist side, on the side of the biblical Christian worldview, we say, hey, the diversity of life is proof. I'm in that camp of an incredible, powerful, intelligent designer creator. Therefore, there must be a God. God must exist. But here's what you have to be prepared for. The naturalist says the diversity of life is proof of how natural law and evolution have branched out over billions of years. So even though you might think it's a great talking point, you have to be prepared for the fact that they're going to look at you and say, oh, I agree. Isn't that amazing how it all just branched out into so many varieties like that? Now, they have no explanation for how that happened and the programming involved and so forth. But remember I put Jeff Goldblum's character on the screen last week, Dr. Malcolm from Jurassic Park series. I remember his classic line, life finds a way. You know, well, that's poetic, but it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't hold any rational logic. Here's the next question then. The naturalist then looks across and says, okay, so you say God exists and that God designed and created everything? I have a question for you. Where did God come from? Who made God? They always love to bring that. You watch any of the debates on YouTube or the different locations around for the last 30, 40 years, you'll always hear that comment. Well, here's your best answer. Well, that's actually not really a very good question. That's an inappropriate question because the God that I'm talking about is not impacted at all by time, which is a physical property, physical space, and molecular matter. He's not comprised of matter. If God is impacted by these three things, then he cannot truly be God. God has to be outside of these three. Why? Because he's the one who designed and created it. He's not part of the creation. He's not in the creation, made up of matter, constrained by space and time. That particular question inherently assumes a very limited God. In fact, in my opinion, that would not be much of a God at all if he's made up of molecular atoms and he's subject to time-space constraints. So everything is either randomly evolved over time or it was intentionally created. That's kind of what we've come down to. So from an apologetic standpoint, you want to have some good talking points. Well, let's start off with the skeptic. The skeptic is going to go to, I call them the 6 assumed axioms. Now you know the term axiom? An axiom is a term used for it's been proven, it's fact, no one debates it anymore, it's an axiom. Gravity on the earth. You go up on the top of this building and jump off, what happens? You die or you break your legs or your whole body or something because you can't survive a 30-foot fall. That's an axiom, okay? It's always going to happen. There's never a time where, well, there's a 20% chance you might float down or something like that, okay? That's an axiom. So the skeptic always invokes what I call the 6 assumed axioms. In fact, many times they'll start their sentence with something like, now we all know this. Now everybody knows this. Of course, it's already been long since concluded about this. And then they fill in the blank with one of these, and this is one of the 6 I'm going to look at tonight. I put in parentheses there are many others, but I only have an hour, okay? But these are the 6 you're probably, when you see them, you'll say, yep, I've seen that one, yep, I've heard that one. And they're always predicated with, well, this is a done deal. Everybody knows this. We all know this is the case. And here's the first one. Darwin's evolutionary tree. He free-handed his little sketch. In fact, here it is. Oh, we'll look at it in a moment. And that free-handed sketch, he just started plugging things in and stuff like that, just off the top of his head, very random, no scientific evidence for any of it and so forth. And that thing has done what over the last 150 years? It has moved into every science textbook, every introduction to anything about biology, chemistry, physics, astrophysics, anything like that, always has something about that. If you go to the Natural History Museum, you're going to see on the wall, what? Darwin's Tree of Life. You go to the zoo and you're walking up to go see the silverbacked gorillas at the top of the hill, just coming off of where the goats are. They have a sign set up, and it has the Tree of Life, a whole bunch of apes and simians and everything, and there's a carve out in the center. And what are you supposed to do? Go behind it and put your face through and look and say, that's your family tree. You know, the gibbons and so forth on Gibbon Island and so forth. So we'll look at that. Number 2, Nicholas Steno, Charles Lyell, James Hutton, and others. Steno is a Dane, and Lyell and Hutton are both Scottish. They were considered the pioneers of geology. And they also freehand drew what's called the geologic table. Anybody take a course in geology anywhere along the way and you saw the geologic table? Okay. And we're going to take a look at that tonight. That thing is also presumed to be end of discussion. There's nothing to discuss there. It's an axiom. You'll be surprised to find, I mean, it's like it was done on like the back of a napkin at a Wendy's or something, you know, up in Edinburgh. They were at a Denny's and they were just kind of sketching it out and stuff like that. And then, what do you think about this? And you'll see in a moment. How about anthropology's evolution progression to modern man? Have you ever seen, it's like me getting out of a couch on a Sunday watching football, start like this, and you kind of slowly stand up and then you kind of start walking as you head to the kitchen, okay? And we'll see and take a look at that. But that's also, every anthropology book has somewhere in there, what? The progression of man over time, okay? Radiometric dating, okay? This is not a website for people who are looking to, meet somebody, okay? Radiometric dating is carbon-14 or sometimes potassium-argon and so forth. Also, many times just presumed as, this is a classic, come on Dave, really? Why would you ever question radiometric dating? And yet we're going to see some evidence tonight about it. The 5th classic axiom that they like to go to is distant light. And there are some really good things about distant light. We know some things, but if you looked at last 2 weeks, we also touched on the idea of what? That maybe the speed of light hasn't always been constant. And what does that do? And then there are some other theories we'll look at tonight, like a gravitational well, and we'll take a look at that. And then the last one, number 6, this is the one that always starts off in your biology book, the warm primordial pool. There's volcanoes spewing stuff, and there's some water, and there's a little tide pool over here, and some water sifting in there, and as we're told, all the elements for life are in there. And then what happens is there's a crack of lightning, and it strikes the pool, and suddenly amino acids are turning into proteins, turning into DNA and RNA, and all of a sudden there's cells that have come around. We took a look at the cell, didn't we? Go back to session 1 and ask yourself, what's the probability of a cell happening by itself? We already looked at that. Okay, so let's go through these. This is a scanned image from the British Museum of Charles Darwin's original sketch. And I noticed how he writes in his own handwriting at the top. I think that's actually kind of ironic in some ways, you know, because he was just making it up. And he's got this little drawing going. And yet what's sad is here in 2023, National Geographic has the Tree of Life. And here's my comment. A randomly sketched picture cannot be validated by any scientific observation. And yet it has become what? An axiom on that skeptic side of the argument. There's no basis for it. It's just simply randomly drawn, and yet it has become a foundational component of every textbook. You open it up and, oh, there's the Tree of Life. Oh, I'm at the Natural History Museum in New York City on Central Park, and you walk in, oh, there's the Tree of Life. There we are, honey, right up above the apes and the, you know, that's us on the other end there, above the Cro-Magnon man and the Neanderthals and so forth, you know. Interesting. Axiom number 2, Nick Steno in the 1650s, Hutton in the 1780s, and then Charles Lyell after him. These are considered, if you have a degree in geology, you are talking about, these are the revered founding fathers of modern geology. In fact, you will read in every textbook that geologists today still rely on what? The geologic table to understand how old rocks are and how old everything is and so forth like that. And if we had time to go through and see how randomly they just sketched this thing. So here it is, the geologic table. It has eons and eras and epochs and periods and, you know, the Jurassic, there's where Jurassic Park comes from and so forth, and the Cretaceous period and the Miocene, Pliocene, the Pleistocene and so forth, the Tertiary and so forth. And they just sketched this thing out. It kind of morphed over about 110 years. It was randomly sketched. It wasn't based on anything. The times were made up. Start looking at some of these numbers. 208 million years. Why isn't it 209? Why not 210? How about 198? Where did 208 come from? There it is, 208, just right from thin air. 570 million years. Why isn't that 550? Why isn't it 560? Why not 558.2? Why is it 570? 4.55 billion years to the Precambrian Hadean period. You know? And it's all nothing but randomly assembled, no basis for it and so forth. They needed 4.5 billion years, so they sketched it out. But you cannot validate it by any scientific observation. And yet that table from the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries is still the foundation of modern geology today. But as an axiom, even the geologists will tell you. Are we off the record? Dave, do you have everything shut off right now and so forth like that? Don't quote me on this, but they would say, yeah, we don't know. Everything was made up on that table. But you guys are using it? Oh yeah, we're absolutely using it, absolutely. Axiom number 6, or supposed axiom number 3, rather, excuse me. Anthropology's ape to man. Now we laugh at this. Here's one with a little color in it, okay? But you know what? Open up any anthropology textbook. Anything about the origins of man, a biology book, and so there will be this picture in there. Who are these? We have no fossil record of any intermediate types. All we have is a bunch of gorillas and apes, some bones found here and there. Do a little research sometime. We don't have time tonight, but read about Piltdown man, and read about Neanderthals, and read about Cro-Magnon man, and you'll come away and you'll suddenly realize it's all been fabricated, and it has come about through just wishful thinking. Here again, look at these guys. Randomly sketched, can't validate it by any scientific observation. There are no intermediate species that exist like this. But this has become what? An axiom. And it'll be presented to you as, well, we all know this is how it is. And you have to always stop somebody on that and just say, actually, we don't all know. In fact, no one knows. This is actually not science. Number 4, radiometric dating. Now we're getting into where it starts to become, okay, Dave, really? You're going to go down this route? I go, yeah, I'm going to go down this route. Wait till you see why. Radiometric dating is the rate that unstable atoms, like uranium, which is a parent isotope, over time convert into a stable atom, like in this case lead, which is the daughter isotope. You can also use potassium argon in the same way as how it digresses into the second element. But here's the problem. You cannot go back to observe the rock actually being formed. You can't. It happens. Scientific method says it's all about observation. You can't observe that. And you cannot validate the decay rate over the past time because you're making a uniformitarian assumption, which is what? The decay rates have never changed, ever. They've always been the same. You also don't know how much of that carbon was in the rock to begin with, because whatever level it had to start with is going to have an impact on what it looked like at the end. But you have to make the assumption, again, of a uniform basis. You can't validate the starting rates for the parent and daughter isotopes either. So the whole model has 4 major assumptions that go into it. They've assumed the ones that give them what they are looking for, which is what? Lots and lots and lots of time. Okay? You cannot date metamorphic rock, and you can't date sedimentary rock. You can only do single source material igneous rock with this. That's something from a volcano. But here's the problem. I'm going to show you just 6 examples tonight. If you were to look at this in all kinds of journals that are out there, even well-respected science journals, they'll say that, yeah, we've actually had a few times we've tripped over ourselves with this one. Oh, really? Let's take a look. There's 34-year-old basalt in Sicily that they know is 34 years old from this particular flood event that took place. And it was radiometric dated as being 700,000 years old. 36-year-old volcanic rocks in Italy and 39-year-old basalt in Hawaii were sent out to labs, and the person who sent it simply said, oh, I and my colleagues are from the National Institutes of Health, we're doing a special study, make a National Science Foundation, something like that. They didn't tell them what they were doing. They just paid the fee and said, could you do your radiocarbon dating on this, radiometric dating? The 36-year-old rock from Italy came back as 2.4 million years old, and the 39-year-old basalt from Hawaii came back as 8.5 million years old. A 500-year-old obsidian deposit in Northern California came back as 12.6 million years old. And a 13-year-old lava dome at Mount St. Helens. You know, Mount St. Helens is one of the most amazing laboratories to go do testing on. We all know it blew in 1980. I was in college when it blew. And I mean, everybody, there was a big event, the plume in the air, the ash moving with the jet stream and so forth and everything. And they went back up in there after things kind of stabilized and geologists were going through and everything like that. And stuff happened in like just 6, 7, 8, 9 years that they would have normally assumed, based on observation and uniformitarian assumptions, would have taken thousands, if not millions of years. Well, there's a lava dome that started to develop. They went in and took samples from the lava dome at Mount St. Helens 13 years after it was starting to form. Sent it into the lab. They got ranges between 340,000 and 2.8 million years old. Here's another one. Mount Ngauruhoe, which is in New Zealand, is another volcano down there. Between 1949 and 1975, there are well-documented, even filmed, we had film and stuff, of the different eruptions. And so the rock that has formed, which is all obviously single source material, igneous rock, they've been able to actually extract it, saying the oldest it could possibly be is from 1945 or 49. Some of it's from 1953, 1958, 1967, 1975, the 5 different eruptions. And all those rocks come back at between 270,000 and 3.5 million years old when they are independently tested. And by the way, you don't get a refund on the fee to the lab when you contact them and say, okay. Number 5. Now this is one that starts to get a little more dicey. You have to be comfortable with what you're talking about here because it is about theory and so forth, but distant light. Light travels at about 588 5.88 trillion miles is how light travels in 1 year at the speed of light, 186,000 miles a second. So we'll call it nice round numbers. In about a year, something moving at the speed of light would travel about 1 trillion miles. Think about that for a second. Oh, excuse me, 6 trillion miles. Yeah, trillion, that's 6 trillion. Now think for a second. Neptune is the farthest planet out in our solar system. 2.7 billion miles. 6 trillion miles in 1 year. That's how fast the speed of light travels, okay? Are you getting that? 2.77 billion miles to Neptune, the last planet after Uranus and so forth. And you think to yourself, man, that's far. 2.77 billion compared to 6 trillion? And that's how fast light goes in 1 year. That's how far it goes. If the speed of light was faster, this is one of the comments we had, Tom asked the question last week during the Q&A, if the speed of light was faster, wouldn't that have huge implications for all kinds of physics and astrophysics? Of course it would. In fact, if it was faster, it could also have an impact on some of the universal constants that we have in the universe as well. Some of these cosmological constants that we have and how things function and so forth. So there's definitely some areas still to be worked on in here. But there's also this term called time rigidity. Time is affected by motion and gravity. Close to the speed of light, you know what Einstein said? If you get closer and closer to 186,000 miles a second, what happens to time? It slows down. It's a concept called time dilation. If our solar system positioned at or near the center of a finite number of galaxies within a finite universe, Earth would then be in what they are now proposing to be what's called a gravitational well. We're kind of in a fixed spot with everything out going from it. And in that well, you don't feel the extra gravity, but time moves more slowly in our galaxy and on our planet as compared to out in deep space because of this gravitational effect of slowing down. As such, that distant light from deep space takes billions of years to reach Earth as measured by clocks in deep space, but it reaches Earth in just a few thousand years as measured by clocks on Earth, because our clocks tick slower than those in deep space. Now, some of you right now are going, okay, are we just about done for tonight, right? Okay. Take a moment, try to digest that. I'm going to give you a wonderful example of how that works in a practical sense, and it involves me. Okay, I actually did this experiment. I flew a 2-hour flight on a jet traveling at 550 miles per hour, and I traveled 1,100 miles from Louisville, Kentucky, at a conference at the University of Louisville. It's in the Eastern time zone. And I flew to Denver, Colorado, to go to a conference at University of Colorado in Boulder. And that's on Mountain Time. I left at 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, and I landed in Denver at 2:30 p.m. in Denver. I experienced 120 minutes of time pass while I was in my seat. It's confirmed on my iPhone, little clock, and the 2-hour movie that I watched on my MacBook. Interestingly enough, though, as soon as we landed, what happened to my clock on my iPhone? It switched. Universal time was 2 hours, but local time, local cosmic time, was 0. No time passed. I left at 2:30 and I arrived at 2:30. At 2:30, in fact, when I was sitting in my seat, they were going to close the door, we're going to take taxi. I called my colleague before they shut the door. Actually, I called after they shut the door. Don't report me, okay? And I called my colleague in Denver. I said, I'll meet you in the terminal at 2:30. And he said, okay, I'll see you at 2:30. And what time did I call? 2:30, okay. But I have to travel 1,100 miles, but I'm going to get there at 2:30. So too, light traveling toward Earth always is on the same cosmic local time. For instance, a star created, let's say on the fourth day of creation, a day 4 star, the light departs on day 4, and it could arrive on Earth at day 4 on cosmic local time. Einstein's relativity made it very clear. Light does not experience the passage of time. It's always instantaneous. So there's a lot of work still to be done in this area. It's a strong theoretical basis for the gravitational well, the idea of cosmic time versus universal time. Now, the naturalists had no problem, remember last week, proposing the thing called inflation theory? Remember I mentioned that? That at the moment of the Big Bang, remember that number? 1/1,000,000,000,000 of a second. During that time, the universe expanded and doubled twice in that time period. That's called inflation theory. All kinds of folks working on that right now to get a lot of their numbers to work with the time and the speed of light. And yet we propose the gravitational well, local time, cosmic time versus universal time, which has great theoretical basis for it. And yet it's immediately what? Dismissed. And yet inflation theory, I have a hard time saying 1/1,000,000,000 of 1/1,000,000,000 of a second without laughing. Can anybody measure 1/1,000,000,000 of a 1,000,000,000,000? But they're saying that's what we needed for the universe to double in size twice in less than a second. That is viewed as what? Cutting edge research in astrophysics. Gravitational well, cosmic local time versus universal time is considered what? Come on, Dave. Really? Okay. And number 6, I told you we'd do the warm primordial pool. Some of you have a jacuzzi in your backyard you haven't cleaned in about 3 weeks, and it is slowly becoming what? A warm primordial pool, okay? All right, you have to be careful. There could be some building blocks of proteins and amino acids growing in there if you don't take care of that thing, okay? Just because so here we are. Isn't that wonderful artist rendering? I pulled this from a textbook. So there's Earth. We got a volcano steaming. We've got a planet that's probably within the Roche limit, which should be breaking up, but it's there on the horizon. And nobody laughed at that because, do you know about the Roche limit of planets and so forth? Some of you do, or you're nodding, okay. And here's what's in the textbook. There's actual diagrams drawn by real scientists. Amino acids. They talk about amino acids like, hey, did you find any amino acids on your way in today? Yeah, there's a few on the floor and a couple up here, and that one right here. Oh yeah, there's another one, okay. Amino acids were kind of there. There's boric acid, there's a little evaporation going on, and all of a sudden these polypeptides, which are proto-proteins. That means they're just before they become proteins, okay? We had proto-teenagers in our house decades ago, just before they became teenagers, right? Okay, so these are proto-proteins. Okay? It means they're not proteins, they're kind of beforehand. And the axiom that they treat it with is so not grounded in science, and I'll show you why. In session 1, we looked at the statistics and the probability of having a protein, ultimately amino acid, turn into some kind of a living cell just because of random time and some light hitting a warm pool billions of years ago. We showed the numbers. You can go back to session 1 and look at the math. Here's the thing though. Talk to some of the great scientists out there and they say this. There's a process called hydrolysis. And that's that when you're in water, water actually causes chains of DNA, RNA, and proteins to not gravitate toward more complex forms. You know what happens to DNA, RNA, and proteins in water? They break down. If you're ever in the lab, you have lab experiments, they break down in water into their individual component building blocks, which means water is toxic to the development of RNA, DNA, and proteins. And yet, this is the beginning of the textbook. Travel with me back now, 4.9 billion years ago. Make it 4.8. Make it 4.7. I don't know. I'm starting to sound like Charles Lyell and James Hutton as they drew their geologic table. Just start making up numbers. Okay? It doesn't work. So those are the 6 axioms. There are 20 others I have. We don't have time to cover them, but they're all presented in the books and in the discussions. Even when I've done debates for the Veritas Forum at Campbell Hall, the other side always, many times, leads with some of these. And I'm always thinking to myself, you know how you always say, come on, Dave, really? I want to look across the other, come on, really? I mean, they know that it's not science. So, either everything just happened and evolved, or everything was created. So here's what I'm going to counter for the 6 supposed axioms. I say for you as a good apologist, you can counter with 4 things that are pretty troublesome for a naturalist to handle. The first one is DNA and RNA. I have 45 slides on this stuff. We're going to see 2 of them. Okay. Just know this, deoxyribonucleic acid and ribonucleic acid, I mean, reading on it, I'm not a scientist and so forth, but it is so fascinating. It's unbelievable to read about the coding. In fact, remember our little box that we put up last week about information? What about that meta component? Where did the programming come from? Where did the instructions come from? It's all about information, the meta component. DNA and RNA are all information. They're completely information, and yet they're being attributed to what? Oh, they accidentally popped up in a little primordial pool. It's just beyond me. So you can get back with that. Another is called chirality of molecules or amino acids. Chirality simply means some of these amino acids are what we call left-handed and some are right-handed. In fact, if you held one up, they call it a mirror image. That's the term for a stereoisomer. Aren't these cool terms? I mean, the only place that has better terms is if you're doing regression analysis. Then you can say things like heteroskedasticity and multiclinearity and things like that. But in the sciences, you can say they're mirrored. So if you had an amino acid and held a mirror up to it, the mirror image of it, one is right-hand sided, one is left-hand sided. They're called stereoisomers because they're essentially the same thing, but they're a reflection of the other one. They're not quite the same in these amino acids. And then the other 2 are cell structures and functions, and I would simply say refer back to session 1. We did a detailed drill down on the cell. And then humans. Remember we talked about 23 different systems, all completely integrated on one calcium frame, fully functioning, 50 trillion cells, fully programmable, all these interconnected, interdependent systems. Oh, and by the way, even though all robots are built on mimicking what a human body looks like for function and form, no robot can work unless it's got what? Programming. Someone has to program it. And if you left 2 robots in a room, you don't get another little robot in 6 months, okay? They do not self-replicate, okay? And yet humans can actually give birth and so forth. So we won't cover those last 2 in great detail tonight. The 2 we're going to focus on, the 2 biggest troublesome things in responding to what are supposedly 6 axioms are DNA, RNA, and then the chirality of molecules and amino acids. So let's do the first one. Troublesome number 1 is DNA and RNA. It blows my mind. It reads like you're reading computer code. There are 4 chemical, what they call nucleotides. There's another great word. If you want to be out to lunch with somebody sometime, you just start dropping nucleotides, okay, something like that. So, but these are the coded letters, if you will, letters. And they commonly are referred to as ATCG, for adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. And here's a quote from the book. And this is a science textbook. It's not a Christian book. It's not creation research. It's nothing, just a regular science textbook. I've always used this for the last, about 8 or 9 years. I love this quote. And I put in yellow highlights. Do they even realize some of the terms they're using? Think about this. Quote, a DNA molecule is 2 strands wound around each other. It's called a double helix. The adenine pairs with the thymine, the A with the T. The C pairs with the G. And the sequence in a portion, that portion is called what? A gene, has, here's the first highlight, specific instructions embedded in it. They actually say that in the textbook. It has specific instructions embedded in it. Those specific instructions are, second highlight, say it with me, required to assemble a protein. This is like you bring home your IKEA furniture in the box. You lay out all 6,000 pieces on the floor, and then your wife or husband says, where's the instructions? And you start looking at everything, and you ever just wing it? Right? And when you have something that kind of looks like it's an entertainment center, but the only problem is there's about 8 parts left over, 6 screws, 4 of these little things, you're kind of like, okay? You need the instructions. Listen to that. Specific instructions are required to assemble the protein. Here's another highlight. Genetic Code is how the ATCG are strung together so that the cellular machinery, called the ribosome, can do what? Read them. Did a creation scientist write this paragraph? No, this is in a textbook on cell biology, the chapter on DNA and RNA. Let that sink in for a moment. The sequence in a portion, which is called the gene, has specific instructions that are required to assemble the protein. The genetic code is how, what we call the ribosome, is how the ATCG are strung together in that cellular machinery, the ribosome, so that it can then read them. And this all did what? Came about through natural, random, unintentional, statistical probability chance over billions of years of time. It's all information. It had to come from a source. Someone had to program this. You couldn't possibly have that happen on its own. Troublesome number 2, the chirality of molecules and amino acids. By the way, if you go home tonight and somebody asks you, hey, did you go to that thing with Newton? First of all, I can't believe you went to that thing with Newton again tonight. Okay. Then they're going to say, okay, so you went, and what did he cover? You can just come back and say, oh, we did the chirality of molecules and amino acids. And we looked at nucleotides, okay, which are different than red tides, okay, and high tide and low tide. So here's the mirror image, okay, on that, the way we look at it. Can you see the L form, which is called the levo, and the D form, which is the dextro? They are literally mirror images of each other. One could literally fold over on the other. It's what you'd see in the mirror as you were looking at it, that mirror image. These are the building blocks of DNA. The L form, which is the levo, you can see that there on the right, is the right-handed nucleotide. And the D form, the dextro, is the left-handed nucleotide. They're mirror images of each other. The DNA is exclusively coming from L form. So hold that thought for a moment. DNA is exclusively made up of L form amino acids. Exclusively. Amino acids in proteins all come from the D form. So if you were going to do a primordial pool experiment, get some goo going, a little stirring going, get the temperature up to like 104. We keep our jacuzzi at 100. That's kind of nice, And then wait for the lightning to strike. If you did some experiments in the lab and you could somehow get some levoform and dextroform, LD, right-hand side, left-hand side, building blocks of DNA to somehow spontaneously produce, the problem is this, and this is what they do not have an answer for. You would, on average, get, over several experiments, about 50% of each. You'd get about 50% of each, left-handed and right-hand-sided of these DNA building blocks. The problem is, in order for you to have DNA, it has to all be the L form. It all has to be the right-hand side nucleotides. So if you're getting random ones, 50-50, it's not going to work. Same thing with the amino acids in the proteins, all come from the D form. And yet if you're getting a mixture, a 50-50 mixture, it's not going to work. So you could just keep doing that over and over and over, and we looked at the math on that in session 1 2 weeks ago. Remember, it was greater than 1 chance in 1 to the 50th power? Is greater than that, the likelihood that you could get that to happen. The primordial pool experiments produce about 50% levo and about 50% dextro. Only, and this is what it says, this is what cracks me up, it says it in the textbooks. Only biochemical engineering can intentionally designate or separate them. Do they realize that that statement is essentially saying what? It can't happen randomly. Only biochemical engineering can intentionally designate, separate them into the right components so you could end up with DNA and so forth. Isn't that amazing? And here's my favorite one, as if we didn't already have a lot of great information. 3 things about DNA. Number 1, it has its own built-in backup redundancy. How many of you have a computer? Is your stuff backed up? I think so. Okay. Well, you can either do it manually every time you think about it, maybe every couple weeks, you hook it up to a terabyte drive and move all your data over. Or you can be on a system that's just constantly, whenever you're on the web, it's constantly updating, checking your files, making sure they're updated in the cloud or somewhere on some kind of a service. DNA has a backup redundancy built in. In case any damage or mutations happen along the chain, it has others that can do what? Pick up where it left off and make sure it still works. And that happened by random chance. I'm being facetious, okay? The information, number 2, in the DNA is error correcting and self-screening. If there are any copying errors going on through the DNA, it'll go, oh, wait, we had a little copying error there. Let's go back and fix that, and it does that. The scientists step back from it. If you know anybody who's in genomics of any kind, they'll step back and they'll say, isn't that fascinating? And I always say, one of Kim's cousins is worked at Genentech in the early days when they first launched, and he's a super brainy scientist in genomics and so forth. And he always says, I'm amazed that they'll simply say, isn't that amazing how that works? And they won't attribute it to anything other than random chance over time. First of all, the DNA molecules, they couldn't even begin to exist through the primordial ooze, and yet they're saying we've already got them, and isn't that cool how they have backup redundancies and error correcting and self-screening built in? Finally, number 3, info in DNA is overlapping, so they can code for more than one protein if needed. So based on whatever it's doing, it can say, you know what, we can cover that as well. So these 3 functions of how DNA functions are just amazing. And we're back once again to what? This entire thing is based on information. Let me give another example. Decoding DNA and RNA. Here's what a typical computer screen looks like in terms of how they code DNA and RNA. Maybe you've seen something like this. March 31st, Kimmy, your birthday, back in 2020, the Journal of Science published an article that said this. And again, I'm not making this up. You can look these up, and when you read them, you have to start to ask yourself, do they know what they're saying? Journal of Science said this: scientists have finally assembled the full genetic blueprint for human life, adding missing pieces to a puzzle completed 2 decades ago. We finally got it done. 1,200 scientists worldwide took 2 additional decades beyond 2002 to get to 2020 and finally fill in the remaining pieces of the human code. In fact, this website, you can get the notes on my website and you can go plug this in. It's a really fascinating video, about 2 minutes long, walks you through the timeline of how DNA was discovered and the progress it went through up through 2020, where they finally filled in all the missing pieces. 1984 to 2004 was the first 20 years of the timeline, and it's been another 18 years since 2004 to fill in the final components. That's 40 years of more than 1,000 scientists worldwide working on this. Hundreds of intelligent minds needed decades to do what? Decipher the coded nucleotides that occurred by random chance. I mean, it's just fascinating to me that they would attribute all of that. I mean, they're working round the clock with grants and teams and separate researchers in New Zealand, Australia, China, Canada, the United States, Western Europe, and they're trying desperately to break the code. It only took, 4 decades to do it, with their computer programs and simulations and everything. And when it's all done, they said, oh, and by the way, the code came from random chance. No designer, no programmer, nothing. Number 3, we'll make this super quick on this. The troublesome number 3 is the cell. Go back to session 1 and look at what we looked at on the cell. Where's the organic material come from? How did it convert to specific components? How was it aligned into the final functional form? What was the source of the coding instructions for how it works? Compounded probability of all coming together by random accident over time is smaller than 1 chance in 10 to the 50th, which means it couldn't happen. It's all information in the cell. Living cells, by the way, I added this about 3 years ago. They cannot make proteins until the DNA replication and translation machinery is first in place. That means that the whole cell is just sitting there going, if there were cells that spontaneously happened, they'd have to sit around like this and go, we're waiting on the DNA because we can't really move forward without it. And that means you have to have the DNA coming about from spontaneous generation, matching up with cells that spontaneously generated. The compounding of the two probabilities is greater than 1 in 10 to the 90th. There are no intermediate stages of cells that kind of go, well, we're not quite there, but we're functioning. I mean, that's me on a Saturday morning, okay? Maybe you have some of those, your intermediate form, okay? Some of the men who come to men's prayer breakfast on Wednesday mornings at 6:30 kind of stumble in here looking like they're in one of those intermediate, non-fully functioning forms, but ultimately in time they do get it together. Troublesome number 4, the human. And you remember, if you were here for session 1, or you can watch the video that's posted online, you can always go to Newton FIO for Figure It Out, newtonfio.com. The notes are there, the videos are there. We went through all this material in session 1. It's just amazing. All the senses, sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, respiratory, brain function, rigid calcium frame, 30 to 70 trillion cells, 48 interdependent subsystems all wrapped around this frame in 22 square feet of somewhat stretchy outside fabric. Air, food, water, waste, etc. Humans are model basis for most advanced robots. Obvious design specs by a team of engineers that build the robots. Multiple systems, gears, frames, movement, sound, all reflect a team of engineers who built it. And yet they look at the human body and they say, what? It evolved. Came out of chance. Everything requires information programming. It must have information. So here's your takeaways for tonight. There are textbooks, videos, lectures, journal articles, and documentaries all perpetuate these 6 supposed axioms, plus many more. And you cannot just sit there and let somebody say to you, well, the primordial pool, distant light. We all saw, the progression of man. We all know we came from apes, and then Neanderthals, and then Cro-Magnon man, and then Piltdown man, and then, what's the one in the Reseda man, from the valley or something like that. I remember that was one of them. So, number 2, Darwin's tree, the geological timetable, ape to man, the primordial pool. You're going to see these, but you have to be able to respond. You do know that none of those have any credible scientific observable validation, yet they remain integral components of evolutionary narratives. Even today, they're the basis for the narrative. Number 3, radiometric dating and distant light are always cited as proof, undeniable axiomatic proof of long time. Yet both are dependent on a uniformitarian assumption of natural law that is still being studied. And finally, DNA, RNA, levo-dextro positioning of those stereoisomers and the cellular structure and processes are all just nothing but information, information, information. Where did the information come from? Do you remember I read several slides ago that quote on DNA, that it's all about, it's required for the process, the instructions have to be given over so that the machinery can actually read the instructions. That's in their language. And finally, natural law to them made it all happen. Or natural law is the outcome or the result of the creation. So I'm going to close with this. This is a fun one. Tonight I brought my Texas Instruments BA 2+, Business Analyst 2+, financial calculator. So I want to show off that, my PhD isn't in biology, chemistry, astrophysics, or anything like that, but I have a PhD in finance. I have an MBA in finance. I know how to do cash flows. I know time value of money. You can use the time value of money to take a look at something very, very easy to do, which is population on our planet. There's a rule called the rule of 72s. Anybody heard of the rule of 72s? Okay, money doubles in a product of 72. So if you have money put away at 8% for 9 years, it'll double. If you put money away for 10 years at 7.2%, it will double. If you put money away at 23.5% for 3 years, it will double in size. It's the rule of 72s. The product of 9 times 8 is 7. Some of you are going, where'd you get the 72, Dave? You lost me back there. Okay. 9 times 8 is 72, okay? That's how you, 7.2 times 10, etc. So, I've always done this just for fun, and it drives the skeptic crazy because they have no response for it. The biblical view is this, that the flood took place around 2484 BC. So up till today, in 2023, that's been 4,507 years since the flood. Now again, if you're in geologic time frame in the naturalist approach, you view 4,500 years as what? Oh yeah, oh Dave, that's nothing. But stop and think for a moment. 4,500 years ago. How about 100 years ago? How long ago was that? Right? Go back to 1923. 200 years ago, 300 years ago. Where were we 300 years ago in 1723? What was our technology like, right? That was just 300 years ago. 4,500 years ago is a long time. That's 45 centuries. Don't minimize that because people are throwing around billions, trillions, quadrillions like they're nothing. It's like government officials talking about the debt and the spending, okay? They don't know anything that they're talking about. 4,500 years ago, 8 billion people on the planet today, exactly 8, we just passed 8 billion recently, and 8 billion would have started with what? 8 people who got off the ark, 4 men and 4 women. Noah and his wife, his 3 sons and their wives. So 8 people got off the ark, 8 billion today. I'm going to show you the power of compounding. Okay. Any of you have a 401k, an IRA, a 403b or something like that? Over time, take a look at what happens. If 8 people exited the ark 4,500 years ago, and today there's 8 billion, I've had people not do the math, they just look at the numbers and they go, well, there's your problem right there, Dave, that could never happen. And I always go, do you want to borrow this and just plug the numbers in? So you plug in 8 for present value. You plug in 8 billion for future value. You plug in 4,507 years for n, that's the number of time periods, and you hit compute I. And that's the interest rate, or the growth rate that you would need to turn 8 people into 8 billion in 4,500 years. How many are with me on that one? Okay, 6 of you. Okay, let's see. Let's go through some basic, okay. 8 present value, 8 billion future value, 4,500 years, compute I. It comes out to 0.4609% annual compounding rate. Not 4.6%, not 46%, 0.46. That's what? That's less than 0.5% per year. And you might say to yourself, well, is that a realistic number? Well, the National Institutes of Health, NIH.gov, shows that the long-term global rate for population going back to the 1300s has been between 1/4 and 1/2%. Where does 0.4609 fit? Right in between 1/4 and 1/2%. Okay. If you grew the population at just under 0.5%, 8 people getting off the ark 4,500 years later would be how many? 8 billion. It takes 4,500 years for 8 to turn into 8 billion at less than 0.5% growth per year. Is that a wild assumption on my part? Or is it logical, rational, sound? Pretty sound. Fits right in. Here's where it gets wacky. Let's go to the evolutionist side. I pulled out a whole bunch of these. I have several slides, but I'm not going to do them all tonight. 5,000 BC, many textbooks say there were 30,000 Homo sapiens on the planet at 50,000 BC. I don't know how they know that. 50,000, why not 48,000 BC? Why not 52,000? Why not 47,350? Is 50,000 BC, there were 30,000 Homo sapiens. I'm going to go really conservative and give them a break. I'm going to go to the bottom end of the National Institutes of Health, and I'm going to say, how about 1/4% growth rate? Do you know if you use that, take 30,000 people present value at a 0.25% growth rate, and you want to get to a future value of 8 billion, it only takes 5,004 years to get that. That means there would be 8 billion people on the planet in 45,000 BC. Digest that for a moment. From 50,000 BC with 30,000 people, in just 5,000 years, there'd be 8 billion people. And where are we? 45,000 BC. My calculator failed in its attempts to take it out any further than that because you end up with scientific notation beyond what the Texas Instruments programmers built into the chip. Here's another one from a textbook on anthropology. In 8000 BC, the dawn of agriculture, there were 5 million humans on the planet. Oh, they talk about it like it's an axiom. Oh, it's all there. Okay, at a 0.25% growth rate, 5 million people starting in 8000 BC would get to 8 billion in just 2,955 years, less than 3,000 years. So that would be about 5000 BC. So we'd get to 8 billion people at 5000 BC. One textbook says that the population of the world was 200 million in 1 AD, because they make the quote, 1 in every 200 people lived in the Roman Empire. Okay. If you took that number and moved it out to today, 200 million to 8 billion, the growth rate would have to be just 0.1825%. Technically, that's not enough to actually support a population. Okay, you actually have too many people dying compared to people being born, and you actually lose. That's what's going on in Europe right now. They're not having enough children, and so the death rate compared to birth rate is not enough to replenish and grow, and the populations are shrinking. That's why they don't have workers and things like that. Here's where it really gets fun. We'll close with this. You saw these first two examples, right? 30,000 Homo sapiens got to 8 billion in just 5,000 years, which would be 45,000 BC. If you went out just 7,500 years, you're still at 42,500 BC. I mean, you're not even close to today. There'd be 4 trillion people on the planet by the time you get to 42,500 BC. Look at the one below it. Remember the second example? 5 million humans turned into 8 billion in just under 3,000 years, got you to 5,000 BC. If you went out 5,000 years to 3,000 BC, there's 1.3 trillion people on the planet. And here's my favorite one. If you go out to the time of Jesus, there'd be 2.367 quadrillion people on the planet. That's quadrillion. We're at 8 billion right now. Okay, then comes quadrillion. I mean, trillion. I mean, you can see this is it's just silly. 2400 BC to today gets us a 0.46% growth rate for 8 people coming off the ark to turn into 8 billion people. In 2 BC, at the birth of Jesus, there were about 2 million people on the planet. That'd be about a 0.5% per year growth rate from the time of the flood. Does that make sense? Fits, doesn't it? It's not crazy. From Jesus to the Magna Carta, they say at the time of the Magna Carta, 1215 AD, there were 164 million people on the planet. That's a 0.36% growth rate since the time of Jesus. In 1804 was the first time our planet passed 1 billion people in its population. That's a 0.344, again, fits right within that growth rate since Jesus. At the end of World War II, there were 2.3 billion people on the planet. That's about a 0.36% growth rate from the time of Jesus. In 2000, at the millennium, Y2K, all that stuff, remember? We were at 6.14 billion people, and that's about a 0.4% growth rate since the time of Jesus. And today, 8 billion people, since the time of Jesus, works out to about a 0.41% growth rate. Which is more logical, that we had about a 0.5% growth rate from the time of the ark until today, or these other things like, 50,000 hominids or Homo sapiens or whatever, early man. Here's the readings for this week, the ones that I'll recommend. This little booklet is fantastic. Creation by Design, 1996 from Mark Eastman. Great stuff in here. You'll really enjoy it. It's written for the layperson. You don't have to be really scientific, but Mark's a medical doctor and a researcher. He'll do a great job explaining some things. I have him in there. And then I go back again to summarize this evening. Dr. A.E. Wilder Smith makes that comment I read on the first night. Only information theory can explain the genesis of self-replicating information storage and retrieval systems in biology. In the present volume, we have therefore endeavored to present and to develop a scientifically sound theory based on information factor as a scientific alternative to Darwin's hypothesis. And that's the key. is that there is no way for the information component to just happen out of nowhere. Another good read that's on the list there that I have for you is, let's see, Gene Simmons. Did I put him on the list? Oh, he would have been on last time around. This is a great read by Jeff Simmons, What Darwin Didn't Know. And it's a modern biomedical engineer going back and saying, had they known what we know today, they would have never proposed what they proposed. So they didn't understand genomics like we do today. And then one other good read for you, I put this in here as well. Let's see, where is it? John Ashton, there he is up at the top. He's the editor. It's called In 6 Days, Why 50 Scientists chose to believe in creation. First version came out in 2001, the second edition came out in 2007. And each of the 50 scientists get a couple of pages to talk about it, and they're not all Christians. They're also just telling you that, the numbers just do not make any sense. So, a couple other readers down at the bottom here. Tom Lowe is another great one. I've just finished recently, Evolution and Intelligent Design in a Nutshell. You'll find that pretty interesting. And then Don Patton's book on catastrophism, I think you'll find that also interesting. So here's our logical segue to our next session. The origins of life are extremely unlikely to have occurred by random chance, significant additional foundational proof for God. The objective math-based scientific probabilities for such incredible design and precision in both the physical forms and the metaphysical functions to come about simply by random naturalistic chance over an assumed long period of time is simply not rational. It's not logical. It's not even plausible. In fact, it defies common sense. What if a designer, creator, God, wanted to communicate information about himself to his creation? Could he do it generally through everything he designed, but could he also do it specifically through his own information release process, medium? What we're going to get into next week then is, again, this isn't a 12-week study on creation versus evolution. It's on apologetics. So we'll have a natural segue next week on the 26th into, could the Bible then be that medium of communication? Is it possible that the Bible could be the way that the creator-designer wants to communicate with us? And we'll ask questions like this from the skeptic. What's up with the Bible anyway? What's your position on its content? Is it true? Is it reliable? Doesn't it have a lot of errors? So we're going to get into that starting next week on the 26th. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for this time together. I pray that people would be encouraged. I pray the information would be logical, thoughtful, rational, reasoned, that we could then feel equipped to defend the faith. And Lord, even as the world has these axioms that are supposed just undeniable, beyond any discussion, Lord, you'd give us the ability to recognize how to respond. And Lord, thank you that as we look deeper into DNA and RNA and the coding and the cell and the human body, Lord, we are just amazed at the design, the specific fine-tuning, and especially the information programming that goes in. And we know that it has to come from an outside source. And so as we look next week at the Bible, I pray that we would take it logically, rationally, thoughtfully, and reasonably, and start to look and see, is there any credibility, any viability to the Bible? And so I pray for each person who's here, a blessing on them for having come out this evening. Thank you for this time, and we give it to you in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so, thank you, okay.